Welcome to the Think Factory podcast. We got one question for you. What keeps you up at night?
I'm your host, Chris Santomassimo from OGC Solutions. And part of what we do sometimes with the Think Factory podcast is to spend time at industry trade shows. In this case, our relationship with the folks that we'll spotlight today comes from the Printing United Expo. But what we always look for are people that are doing interesting things with the products and services that they offer and solving problems for clients. And that's ultimately what we all need to do as service providers and manufacturers. So I'm really happy to introduce everyone on the podcast to Rick Pallante and to Chad Petzke. They're both from Baumer hhs. Specifically, Rick is the president of the company, and Chad Petzke is the sales manager for the print finishing group at Baumer. So welcome to the podcast.
Thank you.
So again, we're always looking for people that are not only friendly and have or can get into an interesting conversation, but I was really impressed with some of the things that your equipment does. And, I'm always looking for a story that talks about a problem and a solution, or an issue and a solution, and why somebody was able to attack the problem. So I'd love to hear a little bit about, to start off with, tell us a little bit about Baumer that folks may not know, Baumer hhs, excuse me. Let's talk about what your equipment does. I want to circle back to some of the problem solves that we chatted about before the podcast.
Baumer hhs is a manufacturing company that makes hot melt, cold glue, and verification equipment. And we make it for, besides the print finishing industry, we do for folding carton, end-of-line packaging, and corrugated are our main markets. Chad is our industry specialist within our print finishing group. And one of the things for like trade shows like Printing United that we really like is customers come with us with different types of applications and different types of issues that they have. And these are people that you normally wouldn't necessarily have easy access to. So it's kind of good at a trade show when you have your products in front of you and you have your experts there in the booth. It's a one-stop shop for a lot of customers to come into this. So Chad can go through like one for a check manufacturer, or it was a company that uses rebate checks, and they came to us with an application, and Chad, I think, can walk you through that.
If you don't mind me interrupting for 1 second, Rick, I think you're being a little humble about some of the things that your products do, especially when you talk about packaging, and we're going to talk about the check production that your equipment gets used on. I don't think people in your industry get quite the respect that they should, because what you're doing, or let's say it this way, without what you do, we wouldn't have these products, because you'd have a piece of cardboard in the case of corrugated that doesn't stay together because there's no glue.
Well, it's kind of funny. We tell customers that a folding carton is the most expensive piece of printed paperboard they will ever have until it gets glued together. Because at that point, it's just a pretty piece of paper, and until it actually gets glued into a tube or has glue applied so it ends up as a viable product, it is just work in process. And so, we're an important part of the whole issue. We have, go on almost every OEM machine, and it's $100,000 to $1 million machine, and it doesn't work unless the glue application works. And unless anybody's ever sorted a semi truck full of product, you haven't lived till you've been able to do that. That's where QC systems are so important nowadays, is it gives you that reliability that everything gets checked before it goes out to the customer, so that you're not getting anything back and your reputation or your rework account are not both being hit.
Correct. Yep.
It's the same way in the bindery too, in print finishing, if it's a pharmaceutical piece, a leaflet, or if it's a direct mail piece, it is until it gets the glue on it and gets in the mail or onto the package, whatever the case is, it really is not a finished product. And we're kind of the last step, and we're sometimes something that customers maybe not think about right away or until the very end, or, there's a problem with it. So yeah, we're kind of the last touch of the piece before it gets into the consumer's hands.
Yeah, and the glue application that we're talking about is not just willy-nilly, let's use whatever kind of glue we want and squirt it around, just to use layman's terms. This is pretty precise stuff that goes on in a certain thickness. It goes on in a very specific place. And the type of, the glues that you're going to use are very, very application dependent, I would think.
They are, and different types of glue for different applications. A lot of our pieces have to be very precise if it's in the folding carton industry or if it's in direct mail or pharmaceutical. We just can't just put it anywhere. It's got to be in the right spot for postal regulations, for, pharmaceutical FDA regulations. So we've got to be quite accurate at all times to be able to meet those customer needs.
Yeah, a bigger part of that too is also the manufacturer. If the dot goes, doesn't go on to the piece of paperboard or the mailer and ends up in the machine, it's a maintenance nightmare for them. And so being able to have that accuracy is critically important for them to be able to run their application nonstop. The last thing the thing that costs them the most money is to have a piece of equipment there and not being able to run it.
And then you've got the ability to use both water-based inks as well as UV inks, depending on the application, right?
Not so much ink, but adhesives.
Glues. I'm sorry, glues.
Yeah.
Yes.
So yes, we have a line of cold adhesive equipment and a line of hot melt equipment and verification for both products, whether it be a thermopile for the hot melt or either UV or a cold adhesive detection for the cold.
And I was also impressed with another fun fact that we shared before we got together, which is the water scoring ability that the equipment provides. Talk a little bit about that, because I think folks would be surprised about where that application lends a lot of resource.
Sure. It's mainly used on offset stocks. There are some people that do water scoring on coated materials, but not very many. But what the water score does, mainly in the pharmaceutical industry, is it helps break that fiber or help that fiber bend without any wrinkling or boxing where you couldn't put a mechanical score on. And so what we would do is in the first section, we would put the the water down on a flat sheet. We make the first section folds, or usually an accordion fold. And then when it goes into the right angle, or station 2, that is where the water score comes in. That sheet is already moistened, and then that helps that sheet fold nice and square, nice and flat. It kind of takes the bulkiness of it out, so that helps with that folding in mainly really, really thick applications or on a thin stock where a mechanical score will be of good assistance to you.
And that explains how you get pharmaceutical product inserts that are folded 40 times or 30 times just to be able to fit in the package, right?
Yes, exactly. And you get those rolled down. And then also when that piece is still kind of wet, because of course the water does evaporate a bit, not too much of a time, but they also run it through a crushing unit, and that water helps so that sheet doesn't wrinkle when it gets crushed. It helps it lay flatter also.
Yep. I mean, these are critically important for your customers in the pharma industry to be able to get those product inserts in the right shape and in the packages accurately. But people don't give you quite the credit because they don't fully understand how you fold that thing up 40 times to be able to fit it in that little tiny box, right?
Yeah, that is true. I have many people that'll have them, and it's like, how do they do this? And, it's a specialty folder, it's water scoring, it's latex gluing, it's a lot of different steps, and knife folding, buckle folding to make that happen. And it's kind of, when you explain it to people how it actually happens, they become quite interested, because it's not a normal, run-of-the-mill folding application like you would have maybe in a bindery or in a commercial printer.
Yep. Yeah, one of the thousands of things that printers and the equipment manufacturers that support them, that you don't quite get enough credit for how complex a little job like that is to create that little tiny football, if you will, of a product insert.
Yeah, and it's got to be precise too. You can't have a lot of variation because it goes through an automated system when it's put on the bottle or into the carton. So if those aren't folded exactly how they need them spec, it causes problems down the line, just the same as ours would. If we had a problem with folding or in folding carton, if in the bottling plant that carton doesn't erect properly and the speeds they need, then there's trouble down the line. You got a bunch of waste again.
Again, yep.
So,
and the key, obviously, for a printer is to minimize waste, right? Because every time you waste a sheet, that's one little click off your margin.
It is. And paper's expensive, printing's expensive, so they're very valuable pieces. So we want to save as many as we can or have as little amount of waste as possible.
No doubt. And Rick, you were talking about verification of a tractor trailer load of material. Talk a little bit about verification and where Baumer hhs equipment fits in the equation.
There's different ways you can do it. You can do it either by, actually looking physically at the adhesive. So you're looking at where it stops, where it starts, how much is there, is it in the right location? And we can even look to the point where is it in places it shouldn't be. We call that anti-glue. So if you're looking at a carton or a piece of paperboard and you're looking at an area that needs to be glue free so it doesn't create a sticky, or if it's like an envelope and it needs to pop open and you don't want to have any adhesive in that area, we can look for it so that we can say, hey, this area always needs to be adhesive free, and we can check that out. So that's looking at it from the adhesive standpoint. Then there is it from the print standpoint, that we can do a print match and make sure that the same piece of literature is going through each time, that there isn't a mix or a misprint or something along those lines, to make sure that that actually is the right piece of product that is going through at that point. So there's multiple ways, and we can do that, we can do that typically via a camera system. So we can view every single one, and typically at very, very high speeds. So you're not typically speed limited by, being able to actually do a visual inspection of the print as it goes through.
Yeah, and without that type of equipment, the only thing you could really reasonably hope for, I think, is a random sampling, hoping you catch the errors. But this actually lets you do it down to the single unit to be sure every single one is correct.
Yeah, I mean, Chad has a long history with this. He can go all the way from the Gutenberg, from printers, all the way back to what's happening now, and what's happened in the printing industry is just actually remarkable. If you look at where we've come from to where we are now, from the standpoint of offset to digital, and it's just a remarkable change in the marketplace.
It is.
Gotcha.
You're seeing a lot of changes out there. A lot of people going to a digital market, having that. And of course, when you're in a digital press, you can have shorter runs. You don't have as much make ready. There you don't have as much make ready for setup for the folder or things like that. So we have to be more precise and get it right the first time, because the printers are changing and the lead times are changing too. They're getting shorter and shorter. People don't give you a lot of time to get things out. So the customers are, they've got to get out their product out to the customer as fast as possible.
Well, I'm sorry, Rick. Go ahead.
Yeah, I'm just saying that we see customers, expanding, just being more than just printers or just more than just folding carton plant. They're actually making their paper, and then they're doing it on rolls. They do the unroll, and then they do the printing, and they do the cutting, they do the die cutting, then they do the drying, and they do the gluing, and they do everything in line. So it starts with a roll of paper, and it ends up with a product coming out the other end, as opposed to going to multiple, locations in order to do the next step. And so you really see a change in the market in the standpoint of people don't necessarily are just being good at one thing. They have to be good at multiple things now in order to be competitive in the market.
And not to mention the fact that you've got multiple manufacturers' equipment all in line with one another, hoping to speak to one another well.
Exactly. Yeah. That's the big thing right now, is being able to have that, the IoT, 4.0, and be able to have everybody speak the same language up and down the production line.
And then have your quality assurance, where maybe we can run ejectors or flippers or things of that nature to get the incorrect product out of the stream before it gets to the final end of tray, whatever the case may be, when it goes out to the next step, or to the customer, or to the post office.
Right. In the direct mail world, I've seen print and fold rates that, they're maybe plus or minus 250,000 units an hour. When you talk about corrugated and folding carton, what are some of the high speeds that you mentioned earlier? What do you typically see?
Well, a lot of times we're having to bench adhesives at, 1 millisecond with plus or minus 1 millimeter accuracy. The line speeds have definitely increased in the aspect. You can see something to 1,500 feet a minute to 3,000 feet a minute. And I mean, it's beyond what the eye can see. And so, we're looking at every single one of these cartons as they go through in that aspect, in order to apply the glue and then to check it to make sure that it's in the right location. And then if it isn't, to be able to send a message to the OEM machine to actually kick it offline at those same speeds.
Mm-hmm. But hopefully in the process, you're minimizing the errors at the same time that and inspecting as you go. So naturally, you're going to have less waste as a result.
You do. You get much less waste in that aspect. And then you're using, gun technology has changed from pneumatically activated guns to electrically activated guns. So no more compressed air. You're just running everything off of a integrated coil into the system. And that really makes a big difference. I mean, the farther that the solenoid is away from the actuator or from the glue head itself, the slower it gets. You've got to be able to deliver the air to the head and then exhaust it back. When you use an all-electric system, you no longer have that. You're opening the coil right then and there. The only thing you're really competing against is the drag of the adhesive on the armature since it sits in the glue stream. So the only thing you're fighting is the drag and the spring force for the spring that recloses the valve once it opens and closes.
Yeah, that's fascinating.
And having an electric gun, we have a much better longevity, a lot longer life cycle for that gun than we would have on a pneumatic gun. So sometimes the pneumatic, are accurate and they're good guns, but they don't last as long. So our electrical guns are far superior in many cases.
Yeah, a pneumatic gun has a dynamic seal which separates the pneumatic air from the hydraulic fluid. And you have the needle that moves back and forth in that. So basically you introduce air underneath the cap of the top one, it raises it up, and then it changes the air direction and then closes it. So it's going up and down through that seal, and it wears it. So typically a pneumatic seal will last maybe 25 million cycles versus an electric gun, which doesn't have any dynamic seals, and it can last up to 1 billion cycles.
Oh, wow.
So your spare parts are less, your uptime is greater. It's just overall an entirely better way to do it. There's a caveat in the aspect that some glues, lower viscosity glues will run better through an electric applicator than a high viscosity. So when you're using the fugitive glues, we're able to use some fugitive glues in our direct mail aspect, because they have a viscosity of around 1,000 to 1,200 centipoise. But there's a lot of fugitive glues that are much higher than that, 2,000, 2,500. And for those, we have to use a pneumatic applicator in order to open and close that, because the drag on the electric applicator is just too great for it to really do that. You'll get a lot of stringing or ovals instead of dots. It's just not the best way to do it. You need to be able to match your adhesive viscosity to the type of gun that you're using in order to get the best application.
And your equipment's able to accommodate both, obviously.
Yes, correct.
Yes.
We
It
can
gives
run
your customers a lot of flexibility.
Yeah.
Sure. We can run fugitive or permanent in our hot gun applications, and also a latex, which is like a fugitive product for cold glue in many of our guns too. So we can work with both.
That's fantastic. And another place that I'm really impressed with is some of the check processing that your equipment enables. Tell me a little bit about some of the projects that you've done for customers in which the Baumer equipment is in line with a check printing operation. We've all received those checks in the mail that don't come in an envelope. They sort of come in one sort of one piece, if you will, that are glued together. So tell us a little bit about that.
We have an application that we have a customer for in the Midwest, and what they do is they do a lot of rebate checks. So you fill out the rebate form, mail it in, they process that information, and then they send you a rebate check back for their store. And what they do is they print those 4 up on a sheet, and then they're folded on a horizon folder, and then we put fugitive glue down, and then they're slit. And what happens then, that check can go directly into the mail tray. They separate them, do the breaks that they need to, and then that goes back out to you, to the consumer who made that purchase. Another application that we do is, maybe you've seen them, that they're snap packs, and you have a perforation on 3 sides, and maybe it's got your PIN number on it or something like that, where that piece is printed with your information, or if it's a promo for a car or whatever the case may be. And then we put glue all the way around that piece that is then put right in the mail that comes to you, and it's a secure package where you take the snapper that tabs off on each side, and there's your check, or there's your PIN number, or whatever the case they might be sending you. So we get in a lot of that products that it's personalized information, and then you drop it in the mail to get to your door.
Yeah, so you're dealing with security issues, number one, and number two, you're making it simpler to mail because you don't have to worry about printing and then having separate envelopes and inserting. It's just all in one process.
All in one process, and things don't maybe get commingled or mixed up as easily if you could, or if you're taking that piece and maybe a check and then stuffing it in an envelope and things of that nature. So
that's phenomenal. Yeah, again, I think it's really interesting just because these are things we take for granted, where we don't understand how much of a process it is to do that sort of printing. So without the kind of equipment we're talking about today, those things just don't get produced.
Correct. You're correct.
So obviously your Baumer is involved in a number of different industries, of course, but based on your experience this past year, what do you foresee on the horizon for 2024 and beyond, maybe in terms of new technology or some of the things that Baumer hhs is planning to introduce this coming year?
Well, I'm seeing a lot of customers more and more, more than the pharmaceutical, looking for some type of quality assurance, a camera, barcode reader, scanners, glue detection, where in the past that these customers never really looked into that. They relied on the person at the end of the folder or the machine to kind of inspect for that. And they're seeing now, maybe more mistakes or whatever the case is. So I'm seeing a lot more people asking about quality assurance in the commercial printing venue more than what it used to be. That's what I'm seeing. And, just speed and accuracy. That's what everybody wants to know. What's new, what's maybe a replacement of something faster, easier, better. So just any way that the customer can get more product out per hour than what they did in the past and with good quality. Nothing's mistaken, mixed up, wrong products, folded the wrong way, whatever the case may be.
Right. And within that, that kind of talks to sustainability, reduction of waste. But for a sustainability aspect for us, we see more and more recycled paper being used. And recycled paper contains, a lot of UV from the printing or from whitening or whatnot that's been through the production stream. And when some customers use UV tracer in order to do their glue detection. And what they're finding more and more is that the UV detection can't tell the difference between the background and the glue anymore. So they're trying to find different tracers that they'll be able to use. There's tracers now that are not allowed in Europe because they're considered carcinogenic. And so they're really starting to struggle with that. And so being able to have technology like we do that, actually will verify the water content within the cold adhesive makes a big difference for us in being able to do that. For our hot melt side of the business, we're seeing more and more customers wanting to do dotting, especially in end of line. So what they can do is instead of doing a full line of adhesive, they dot it. So you could do a 3mm dot with a 3mm gap and reduce your adhesive usage by 50%. And what we've discovered by doing angstrom testing is that package actually is equal to 15% greater bonding than a full bead. So, where operators think that more glue is better, it's actually just the opposite. More glue actually causes you more problems than less glue. So being able to reduce that amount of adhesive is a real sustainability check mark for a lot of customers. Being able to get their sustainability mark on their scorecard and also be able to reduce the amount of plastics that they put into their packaging, as well as increase their bottom line because that's, 50% less adhesive that they're using. And so each of those cartons or direct mail pieces or whatnot become a lot cheaper because there's less glue on that product and less money being spent.
Yeah, and each of those savings gets passed on to the customer or the printer, the ultimate end user of the piece. So everybody sort of benefits from just being a bit more efficient for sure.
Exactly.
I agree.
Yeah. So to wrap it up, folks, by the way, super interesting, just really digging down into a really interesting aspect of the industry. What type of customer would you say, what type of print customer or packaging customer would really want to take a look at Baumer HHS in 2024?
From a packaging standpoint, we would say anybody that's looking for something, being able to check off that sustainability mark by going to a dotting application for their end-of-line packaging or for corrugated manufacturing, anything along those lines, that we can definitely do that with very minimal change to their products. It makes, they go from pneumatic to an electric application. It really saves them a lot of money by doing it that way. And Chad can talk to you from a print standpoint.
It is. I see a couple of things. One of the things that we do offer is we can put a bead of glue down for what we would call a glued 8-page or 12-pager. Then it doesn't have to go through the stitcher. It doesn't have staples in it. It's easier to recycle. It packs better in a carton. So you're seeing people going that route, actually saving some steps. Also, it's easier to pack and you don't have that staple. And the other thing that you're seeing is direct mail. A lot more people are looking at trying to put the glue dots down in their certain applications instead of using a tab where they don't look as good. It's again another step. It doesn't run as fast. They can run it at folder speeds when they're gluing instead of taking it offline and tabbing. So you're seeing people trying to sustain with less consumables, but yes, and less touch points also.
All good stuff. Well, I'd love to just alert people to your website and maybe some other resources if you have any where they could find more information about the products.
Yeah, you can come to our website. It's www.baumerhhs.com.
Terrific. Guys, so many interesting things, and thanks for sort of diving down and giving us some of the dirty details, if you will, about how these things actually get made. I think, as I said, we take them for granted. So without the equipment that you guys produce, we wouldn't have the things that we have when it comes to packaging and direct mail. So thank you very much for everything. But just to sign off, again, this is Rick Pallante and Chad Petzke from Baumer HHS. I hope you enjoyed the podcast episode today. I'm your host, Chris Santomassimo, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you, Chris.
Thanks, Chris.
Thanks, guys.